The little black girl signaled the biker while unknown riders filled the parking levels without speaking a word. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. A cool breeze swept across the empty parking lot as the last of the evening sun dipped below the horizon. The sound of distant traffic echoed through the parking garage, but otherwise, the area was eerily quiet. A small figure, barely 9 years old, stood at the edge of the shadows, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been running for what felt like hours, her feet scraped and bruised from the rough pavement, her clothes torn from the desperation of the chase. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her small bag, eyes wide with fear. She had no idea how long she had been hiding, but she knew she couldn't stay here any longer. She had to act, and fast. Her breath quickened as she spotted the group of bikers parked near the far end of the lot. A mix of leather jackets, powerful engines, and an undeniable air of danger. She knew these men. They weren't like the others who had chased her. These men, they were different. They exuded a sense of protection, of power, and for the first time since the nightmare had started, she felt a flicker of hope. With trembling hands, she made her decision. She took a deep breath and ran towards them, calling out for help. "Please help me," she cried, her voice breaking as she approached the group. The bikers didn't speak at first, but their eyes locked onto her in an instant. One of them, a tall man with a grizzled beard and a leather vest, stepped forward, his face unreadable but his posture tense. His eyes flickered with recognition, but there was no time for words. Without a moment's hesitation, he reached out, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "What's going on, little one?" he asked, his voice low but steady. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaky. "They're after me. They took my brother." The bikers exchanged a glance, their expressions hardening. They knew something was wrong, but they weren't sure what. The girl's eyes were wide with fear, her voice trembling with panic. "He's in the car. They took him. They." Her words trailed off as a sudden noise interrupted her. The sound of tires screeching. The faint silhouette of a silver SUV speeding through the parking lot, heading for the exit. The biker's eyes narrowed. He motioned to the others. "Stay here," he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "We'll take care of this." Without another word, the group of bikers moved quickly, their boots echoing as they fanned out, taking their positions. The little girl clung to the biker's side, her small hands gripping his jacket as she watched in awe. They didn't speak, didn't hesitate. They moved with precision, like a well-oiled machine. As the SUV made its way toward the exit, the lead biker moved first, followed by the rest of the crew. They were determined. The little girl felt her heart race in her chest as she watched the bikers close in, their powerful engines rumbling through the quiet night. This wasn't a scene from a movie. This was real. These bikers weren't just a group of strangers, they were her saviors. And they were about to show her just how far they would go to protect her. The biker led the group toward the exit, his boots steady on the ground as he motioned for the others to follow. The sound of their engines rumbled through the air, growing louder as the silver SUV accelerated. The girl, still clutching the biker's jacket, felt a mixture of relief and fear. Relief that she was no longer alone, but fear because she didn't know what would happen next. She glanced up at the biker beside her, his face hardened with determination, and felt a strange comfort in knowing that, for the first time in what felt like forever, someone was here to protect her. They didn't speak as they moved in unison, the group of bikers cutting through the parking lot like a storm ready to strike. The silver SUV was just ahead, its headlights blinding in the dark as it swerved between parked cars, clearly trying to escape. "Stay close," the biker beside her said in a low voice, his grip firm on her shoulder. "We're going to get him back." She nodded, her heart pounding as they moved faster, following the SUV at a distance but not letting it out of their sight. The driver of the SUV seemed to realize they were being followed. His vehicle swerved suddenly, heading toward the back of the parking lot. The bikers didn't falter. "Go," the biker leader called out, his voice commanding. "We don't lose them now." The convoy of motorcycles sped up, the roar of their engines filling the night air. They turned the corner into the back lot, where the SUV was now making a sharp turn toward an alley. It was a dead end, and the biker knew it. He signaled to the others to spread out, positioning themselves in a way that would trap the SUV. "We've got them," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "No one's getting away." The girl stayed close to the leader, her eyes wide as they approached the alley. Her mind raced, filled with the image of her brother, still in the hands of those men. The closer they got, the more she could feel the tension in the air. The bikers surrounded the alley, their bikes positioned to block any escape. The leader looked back at her, his face unreadable. "It's going to be okay," he assured her. She nodded, but her stomach twisted with uncertainty. The SUV was just ahead, now stopped in the middle of the alley, its engine running. The driver and his passenger were getting out, both men moving cautiously. They were clearly trying to assess the situation. "We don't make a move until they do," the leader said, his eyes scanning the men. "We'll handle this the right way." The girl clutched his sleeve tighter, trying to steady her nerves. The bikers were silent, their eyes trained on the men ahead. The two men seemed to hesitate for a moment before one of them reached into his jacket. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she realized they were armed. "Now!" the leader barked, and with a synchronized roar, the bikers moved. The man with the gun froze, his eyes widening as the bikers surrounded him. The other man was quickly disarmed, the gun snatched from his hand before he even had a chance to react. "You don't mess with kids," the leader growled, his voice low but filled with anger. The other bikers moved swiftly, making sure the two men were detained, their bikes blocking any escape routes. The girl stood behind the leader, watching as the bikers expertly handled the situation, their movements sharp and controlled. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. These men weren't just bikers, they were warriors, and they had just saved her and her brother. The leader turned to her, his face softening for the first time. "We're going to get your brother back. You're safe now." She felt the weight of his words sink in, a rush of relief flooding over her as she took a deep breath. The nightmare was finally over, but the journey was far from complete. They had one more task to do, and the bikers were ready for whatever came next. The leader signaled to the others, and they moved toward the SUV, determined to bring her brother home. The two men, now detained, were no longer a threat, but the real challenge was still ahead. The leader of the bikers, a man with a deep, gravelly voice and a calm but intense demeanor, turned to the young girl standing beside him. "You all right?" he asked gently, his eyes scanning her face. She nodded, though her eyes were still wide with the remnants of fear. He could see she was shaken, but she had made it this far. She was stronger than she realized. The air in the alley was thick with tension, the engines of the motorcycles still rumbling in the background. The girl, who had been silent for a few moments, finally spoke. "My brother. He's still in the car. Please, we have to get him," she said, her voice trembling. The leader nodded, his jaw set with determination. "We're not leaving him behind. Let's go." The bikers moved swiftly, the leader leading the way as they approached the silver SUV. The girl's eyes never left the car, her heart racing as they reached it. The doors were locked, but the leader was ready. With a swift motion, he pulled a crowbar from his belt and pried the door open. Inside, the car was empty. There was no sign of the boy. Panic gripped the girl's chest as she took a step forward. "Where is he?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The leader's eyes searched the car, then he turned to one of the other bikers, a tall man with a weathered face. "Check the back," he ordered. The biker nodded and opened the trunk. There, curled up on the floor, was the girl's younger brother, Jamal. He was unconscious but alive. Relief flooded the girl's heart, and tears sprang to her eyes as she ran to her brother, kneeling beside him. "Jamal," she whispered, shaking him gently. His eyelids fluttered, and slowly he began to stir. Hey, it's okay. You're safe now," she said, her voice breaking. The leader of the bikers, standing just behind her, gave a small, reassuring nod. "He's going to be all right." One of the bikers, a woman with short, platinum blonde hair and a fierce expression, approached the leader. "We need to get them out of here. The cops could be on their way," she said, her voice low. The leader nodded again. "We'll take the back exit. Keep the girl and her brother with us." As the bikers lifted Jamal carefully from the car, the girl clung to him, not willing to let go. The group moved quickly through the alley and out of the parking lot, the sound of their motorcycles echoing in the distance. The girl kept her head down, hiding her face from any potential onlookers. They weren't safe yet. As they rode, the leader kept an eye on the road ahead, scanning for any signs of trouble. The rest of the group followed closely, their bikes roaring like a storm. The girl had never felt so much fear and so much relief all at once. It was hard to believe that in a few moments, her life had changed forever. She looked down at Jamal, who was resting against her, still unconscious but breathing steadily. She whispered a silent thank you to the bikers who had saved them. She didn't know their names, but she knew they were her heroes now. She felt her brother's grip tighten around her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to relax. As they drove through the city, the leader of the bikers signaled for the group to slow down. They were almost out of the danger zone. The girl, still holding on to her brother, glanced around at the men and women surrounding her. They were a family, bikers, outcasts, misunderstood. But tonight, they had become something else entirely, her protectors. The leader finally spoke, his voice calm but commanding. "We're going to take you somewhere safe. You don't have to worry anymore." The girl nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers were her family now, and they would protect her and her brother. The night had been long, filled with fear and uncertainty, but as the group continued to ride into the night, the girl finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. The leader glanced over at her, a small, reassuring smile on his face. "You're safe now," he said again, his voice steady. And in that moment, the girl knew that he meant it. The roar of the engines echoed through the night as the convoy of bikers continued to weave through the streets, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a force of nature. The girl, still holding her brother tightly, sat behind the leader, her body pressed against his, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle in. Jamal, now awake and groggy, clung to her, still shaken from the ordeal. His eyes were wide, scanning the unfamiliar surroundings as the world whizzed past him. "It's over now, little man," the leader called back to him, his voice steady and reassuring. "You're safe." The girl turned her head, looking at the man who had become their protector. She didn't know his name, but she knew he was someone who would never leave them behind. As they rode through the city, the streetlights flashing by in a blur, she began to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. They had escaped, yes, but it didn't feel real yet. She looked down at Jamal, who was resting against her, his small body still tense, his face pale. He was tired, so very tired, but they both were. The night had taken a toll on them, but it was finally starting to wind down. As the convoy approached an old, run-down building on the edge of town, the leader signaled to the others, slowing down. The bikes pulled into the parking lot, and the bikers dismounted, their movements swift and practiced. "This is it," the leader said, looking over his shoulder at the girl and her brother. "This is where you'll be safe." The girl felt a rush of relief. She had no idea where they were, but she trusted him. The building was dark, and the air smelled faintly of oil and dust. It was a far cry from the sterile, cold feeling of the hospital they had left behind, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't matter. They were away from the danger. As they walked inside, the girl was surprised to see that the space, though dimly lit, was warm. It smelled like home, like something familiar, even though she had never been here before. The leader led them into a small room, where an older man with a thick gray beard and kind eyes was waiting. "This is Derek," the leader introduced him, his voice soft but firm. "He's going to help you both get settled." The girl nodded, her heart still racing. She wasn't sure what she had expected, but this was a strange new world. Derek gave her a reassuring smile and motioned for her to sit. "Take a seat, sweetheart. You've been through a lot. I'll get you something to drink, and we can talk." The girl sat down on the worn sofa, feeling the weight of her body settle into the cushions. Her legs were trembling, her hands still shaking slightly, but she didn't care. Jamal climbed onto the couch beside her, his eyes drooping as exhaustion finally caught up with him. Derek disappeared into the next room and returned moments later with a glass of water, which he handed to the girl. She took a sip, her throat dry and scratchy, but the cool liquid was comforting. "What happened to you, kid?" Derek asked gently, sitting across from her. The girl hesitated for a moment, her eyes flicking to Jamal, who was leaning against her, already asleep. She thought about the long journey, about the fear, the pain, the uncertainty of it all. My mom. She's gone, she whispered, her voice barely above a whisper. My dad, he didn't care. And then the men came for us. Her words trailed off as the memories began to flood back, but she quickly pushed them away. She didn't want to think about them. Derek nodded slowly, understanding more than she could say. It's okay, he said softly. You're safe here. We'll make sure of it. The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. For the first time in so long, she felt like she could breathe again. The bikers weren't just a group of strangers. They were a lifeline, a family, offering her and Jamal the safety they had been denied for so long. As Derek stepped out of the room, the girl looked down at her brother, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. He was safe now. They were both safe. The door opened quietly, and the leader walked back in, his eyes scanning the room before settling on the girl. We'll be keeping an eye on things, he said, his tone low but firm. You don't have to worry about a thing. The girl nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She didn't know how to express everything she was feeling, but she hoped they knew. They had saved her and Jamal's lives, and for that, she would never forget them. The leader's face softened as he glanced at the two of them, his eyes full of understanding. Get some rest, he said. We'll be here in the morning, and we'll take it from there. As the bikers quietly filed out of the room, the girl settled back against the couch, her body finally relaxing. She was safe, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to drift off into a peaceful sleep, knowing that the nightmare was over. The morning sun peeked through the cracked blinds, casting a soft glow across the room. The girl woke slowly, her body still heavy with exhaustion, but the silence around her was different from what she had known. There were no more footsteps in the dark, no more fear gripping her heart. She was safe. Jamal was still sleeping beside her, his small chest rising and falling with each steady breath. For the first time in days, the girl allowed herself a moment of peace. She sat up quietly, glancing around the room. The worn furniture, the faint smell of coffee, and the soft hum of distant voices outside the building. It all felt strange but comforting. She stood and walked to the small window, looking out at the unfamiliar street. The world was still turning, life moving on, but for her, it had changed completely. The bikers had kept their word. She had never imagined she would find people who would risk so much for her and Jamal. But here they were, making sure they were safe. As the girl turned away from the window, the door to the small room creaked open, and the leader of the bikers walked in. His face was weathered, his eyes tired, but there was something else in them now, a sense of protection, of responsibility. He nodded at her, offering a small smile. Morning, he said, his voice calm. How are you two feeling? The girl hesitated, unsure of how to answer. How could she explain everything that had happened in the last few days? How could she put into words the weight of the fear, the pain, the relief? We're okay, she said softly. I think we're going to be okay. The leader nodded, his expression softening. Good. We've got some things to take care of today, but I wanted to check on you first. He glanced at Jamal, still fast asleep. You both need some time to rest. I'm fine, the girl said quickly, not wanting to seem weak. We've been through worse. The leader didn't push, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. You're safe now, he said, almost as if reassuring himself. He walked over to the door and motioned for her to follow. I've got a plan to make sure this never happens again. The girl stood up and followed him out of the room, her feet still heavy, but her mind racing. What did he mean? What kind of plan? She had so many questions, but for now, she just needed to trust him. The bikers had become more than just strangers to her. They had become her protectors, and she would do whatever it took to help them protect her brother. As they walked down the hallway, the girl noticed the other bikers, some of them sitting at a small table, others standing near the windows, scanning the street. They were all alert, all on guard. They hadn't let their guard down for a second, and she felt a strange sense of security in that. The leader led her to a small room at the back of the building, where a large map of the city was spread out on a table. The other bikers were gathered around, their eyes focused on the map. We've got a lead, the leader said, pointing to a location on the map. The guys who took your brother, They're part of a bigger operation. They've been moving in and out of this neighborhood for weeks. We need to shut them down, and we're going to need your help." The girl's heart pounded in her chest. She had never been part of something like this before. She had never imagined her life would take such a turn. "What do I need to do?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind was spinning. The leader looked at her, his eyes serious. "You don't have to do anything, not if you don't want to. But we're not letting those guys get away. We're going to take them down, and we'll make sure they don't hurt anyone else." The girl nodded, feeling a sense of purpose rise within her. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to back down now. The leader turned to the other bikers, his voice firm. "Everyone ready?" The bikers nodded, their faces determined. It was clear they had one goal: to make sure the girl and her brother were safe, no matter the cost. The leader turned back to the girl, his expression softening. "We'll take care of it," he said. "You don't have to worry anymore." The girl felt a weight lift off her shoulders as she nodded. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers weren't just protecting her, they were giving her a chance to fight back, to take control of her life again. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a spark of hope. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was part of something bigger, something that would fight back against the darkness that had once consumed her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The leader smiled, giving her a reassuring nod. "You don't have to thank me. This is what we do. This is what family does." As the bikers gathered around, preparing for what was to come, the girl felt a sense of resolve settle deep in her heart. She was ready to take back what was hers, ready to protect her brother, ready to fight. The morning light streamed through the broken blinds as the girl sat on the worn couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her mind was racing, her thoughts running a million miles a minute. The bikers were getting ready for their next move, and she could feel the weight of what was to come. Jamal was still asleep next to her, his small body curled up tightly under the blanket they had given him. She glanced at him, her heart aching for the innocent boy who had been dragged into this mess. He had no idea what had happened, and she hoped he never would. He deserved a childhood free from fear. She shifted her gaze to the group of bikers gathered around the small table, discussing their plan. The leader, the man who had saved them, was speaking in low, steady tones. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "We know where they are. They've been hiding out in the old warehouse district. We hit them tonight. We get in, get them out, and get out before anyone knows we were there." The girl's heart skipped a beat. She had heard stories of the warehouse district, of deals gone bad, of criminals using the shadows as their cover. It was a place where the law couldn't reach, where the rules didn't apply. A place where no one cared about who got hurt. The leader looked over at her, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment. He could see the fear in her eyes, and it softened his expression. "We're going to make sure this is over," he said, his voice low and steady. "No more hiding. No more fear." She nodded, but she couldn't shake the unease in her chest. She wasn't afraid of the bikers. They had proven themselves to be her protectors. But the world they were about to enter was dark, dangerous, and unpredictable. She had no idea what they would face when they got there. She wasn't sure if she was ready for what was to come. The leader walked over to her, his heavy boots making a soft thud as he crossed the room. "I know you're scared," he said softly. "But you don't have to be. We've got your back, all of us." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. These bikers had become her family in the span of a single night, and that meant everything. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I would do without you." He smiled, a small but genuine smile that warmed her heart. "You don't have to worry about that," he said. "You're one of us now." The room fell silent for a moment as the bikers continued to prepare for their mission. The girl could feel the tension in the air, the quiet before the storm. The bikes were ready, the plans in place. It was time. The leader turned to the others. "Everyone knows what to do. We meet at the warehouse at midnight. No exceptions." The bikers all nodded in unison, their faces serious. The girl stood up, her legs a little shaky, but the sense of determination inside her growing stronger. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to let fear control her. It was time to take back what was hers. As the group started filing out, the leader turned back to her. "Stay close to us. We'll keep you safe." She nodded and followed him out, the sound of boots hitting the floor echoing in the quiet building. The bikes were lined up outside, their engines growling in anticipation. The leader motioned for her to get on his bike. "We're going together," he said. "Stick with me, and we'll get through this." She climbed onto the bike behind him, her hands gripping tightly to his jacket. She wasn't sure what awaited them at the warehouse, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going through it alone. As they rode through the city, the streets seemed to blur around her. The night was cool, but the adrenaline in her veins kept her warm. She could hear the other bikes behind them, the roar of their engines a constant reminder that she was part of something bigger now. She was part of a family, and that family was about to face whatever came their way. The leader didn't say anything as they approached the outskirts of the warehouse district. His focus was sharp, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. The girl kept her gaze forward, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She didn't know what was going to happen next, but she trusted the bikers. They had already proven that they would do anything to keep her safe. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a chance at something better. The bike slowed as they turned onto a dark, narrow road that led to the warehouses. The air was thick with tension. They had arrived. It was time to face whatever came next. The warehouse district was silent, the only sound the steady hum of motorcycle engines idling in the distance. The leader's bike pulled to a slow stop, and the girl, her heart pounding in her chest, followed his lead. The other bikers spread out, their movements quiet but deliberate, like shadows slipping between the cracks in the night. The girl stayed close to the leader, her hands gripping his jacket as they dismounted. The cold night air seemed to press in around them, thick with the weight of what was about to happen. They were here to confront the men who had hurt her, who had taken her brother. She could feel the fear crawling up her spine, but there was something else, something stronger. It was the same feeling she had when she had first run to the bikers for help. A spark of hope, no matter how small. The leader turned to her, his eyes serious. "Stay behind me," he instructed, his voice low. "We're moving in fast, but we're not making noise." She nodded, swallowing hard, trying to steady her nerves. She had no idea what to expect, but she knew one thing. She couldn't go back to the life she had before. She couldn't go back to hiding, to living in fear. The group of bikers began to move toward the warehouse, their footsteps barely audible on the cracked pavement. The leader motioned for the girl to follow him, and they crept toward the building. The smell of oil and rust filled the air as they approached a set of large, metal doors. The leader crouched down, signaling the others to stop. "We've got eyes on the inside," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "We're going in blind, but we're ready." The girl's breath caught in her throat. Her brother, Jamal, was inside that building, and they had no idea what they would find. But one thing was certain, they weren't leaving without him. The leader turned to her, his face softening for a brief moment. "We're almost there," he said. "You're doing great." She didn't respond, but the words felt like a lifeline. She wasn't alone anymore. Not with these people, these bikers who had become her family. The leader reached for the door, his hand steady as he tested the handle. It was locked, but the lock was old and rusted. With a swift motion, he kicked it open, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoing through the night. The group moved inside, the sound of their boots muffled by the thick dust on the floor. The warehouse was dark, the only light coming from a few flickering overhead bulbs. The air smelled stale, but it was the smell of something more dangerous, something sinister. The girl's heart raced as she tried to make out shapes in the shadows. She could hear voices in the distance, low and muffled, but she couldn't make out the words. The leader held up his hand, signaling the group to halt. They were close. Too close. The girl's hands were trembling, but she held her ground. She couldn't look away from the shadows ahead. She had to find her brother. The leader turned to her, his voice steady. "We're splitting up," he said. "We'll cover more ground. You stay with me." She nodded, barely able to breathe as the group moved deeper into the warehouse. Her steps felt heavier with each passing second, the weight of what they were doing sinking deeper into her chest. The leader led the way, his eyes scanning the area as he moved swiftly through the rows of crates and abandoned machinery. The girl followed closely behind, her eyes darting from corner to corner. She had no idea what they were about to face, but she couldn't stop now. She had come too far. The sound of voices grew louder, and she could see two men ahead, standing near a set of crates. They were talking in low voices, but the girl couldn't make out what they were saying. Her heart jumped in her chest as she recognized one of them. It was the man who had taken her brother. The one who had grabbed him in the parking lot. The one who had hurt them both. The leader motioned for her to stay back. She didn't argue. This was it. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She had no more fear left. The leader took a step forward, and the men looked up, surprised to see the group of bikers standing in front of them. What do you want? One of them sneered, his hand hovering near his waistband. We're here for the boy, the leader said calmly, his voice cold. And we're taking him with us. The man's eyes narrowed as he reached for something hidden under his jacket, but before he could make a move, the leader stepped forward, grabbing his arm and twisting it behind his back. The other biker lunged at the second man, taking him down with a swift blow. The girl's breath caught in her throat as she watched the scene unfold before her. She had never seen anything like this, so much strength, so much power, but it was for something good. For her. For Jamal. You're not going anywhere, the leader said, his voice firm. Not with him. The girl stepped forward, her eyes focused on her brother, who was tied up in the corner, weak but alive. She rushed to him, her heart racing as she untied him. His eyes fluttered open, and when he saw her, a small smile spread across his face. I knew you'd come, he whispered. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. They were safe now. The leader and the other bikers were keeping the men in place, making sure they couldn't run, couldn't hurt anyone else. And as the girl helped her brother to his feet, she felt the weight of everything she had been carrying for so long finally start to lift. They were free, and no one was going to take that away from them. The warehouse was still and quiet as the group of bikers stood around, ensuring the two men who had been holding Jamal were secured. The girl, holding her brother's hand, felt a mix of emotions flood through her. Relief, fear, but most of all, exhaustion. She hadn't realized how much weight she had been carrying until now. As she glanced around, she saw the other bikers, their faces hard but resolute, standing watch as the leader made sure the men couldn't escape. The tension in the air was thick, but for the first time, the girl felt like the danger was truly behind them. The leader walked over to her, his eyes softening as he looked at her. You okay? He asked, his voice low but steady. She nodded, though her words felt stuck in her throat. I think so. You've been through a lot, he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. But you're safe now. She wanted to believe him. She had to. Jamal tugged at her hand, his small face still pale, but his eyes now filled with something that hadn't been there before. Hope. Are we going home? He asked softly, looking up at her. His voice made her heart ache, but she nodded. Yeah, little man, we're going home. The leader gave her a small smile, then turned back to the other bikers. We've got this. Let's move out. The group started to gather, their bikes roaring to life as they made their way toward the exit of the warehouse. The girl felt a sense of finality in that moment. The fear was behind them, and now it was time to move forward. She climbed onto the back of the leader's bike again, Jamal nestled close to her. The ride was quieter this time, no longer a frantic escape, but a steady, purposeful journey towards safety. The leader led the way, the sound of his bike cutting through the quiet night air, and the other bikers followed in a tight formation. She could feel the weight of the journey lifting with every mile they put behind them. The city lights faded into the distance as they made their way out of the industrial area. The girl looked over her shoulder at the warehouse one last time, the place where so much had changed. It would always be a part of her story, but it no longer had a hold on her. The bikers rode in silence for a while, the engines humming steadily as the night stretched on. The girl kept her focus ahead, her grip on Jamal's small body tight. He had fallen asleep against her, the exhaustion of the past few days finally taking its toll. She could feel the warmth of his little body, and it comforted her more than she had expected. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to feel safe, to feel like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The leader slowed as they reached the outskirts of town, signaling for the others to pull off the main road. This is it, he said, pulling into a secluded area where the group could rest. The girl's heart skipped. It wasn't home, not yet, but it felt like the first step toward something better. The bikers began to dismount, setting up camp for the night. The girl and Jamal got off the bike, and she helped him onto a nearby bench, his small frame still tired from everything that had happened. The leader approached her, his face softer now as he watched her and Jamal. We'll stay here for the night, he said. We need to regroup. Make sure no one's following us." She nodded, not knowing what to say. The past few days had been a blur of fear and uncertainty, but now, here, in the quiet darkness, she could finally breathe. The leader gestured to the others, giving them quiet orders as they set up a campfire. The air felt cool, but there was a warmth in the way the bikers moved, the way they took care of each other. The girl watched as they prepared food, their voices low and steady, the mood surprisingly calm given what they had just done. She had expected them to be cold, distant, people who were used to violence, to chaos. But instead, she saw something different. They were a family, their bonds forged in a way she couldn't yet fully understand. As the night wore on, the girl and Jamal sat together by the fire, the warmth from the flames casting long shadows around them. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the weight of the world finally begin to ease. "You're safe now," she whispered to him, brushing his hair from his face. He looked up at her, his eyes tired but trusting. "I know, sis. I know." The leader walked over, his footsteps quiet in the night. He gave the girl a reassuring look. "We'll get you two settled," he said softly. "You don't have to worry anymore." She smiled at him, a small, fragile smile that felt like a promise. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He gave her a brief nod before turning to check on the others. The girl looked down at Jamal, his little body curled up beside her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had something to hold on to. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a family now, a family that would fight for her, for Jamal, and for the life they deserved. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but she wasn't scared anymore. She was ready, and with the bikers by her side, she knew they would make it through whatever came next. The morning light broke through the trees, casting long shadows over the camp where the bikers had gathered for the night. The girl, still holding Jamal close, watched as the others began to stir, their movements deliberate and quiet, each one focused on their task. The previous night had been a blur, fear, tension, and relief all mixed together. But now, in the calm of the morning, there was clarity. The danger had passed, but the work was far from over. She took a deep breath, watching the smoke rise from the campfire as the leader walked over to her. "We're getting closer," he said, his voice steady. "But today, we need to make sure everything is set before we move forward." The girl nodded, unsure of what came next but trusting him. She had to. She had come so far, and with the bikers by her side, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Jamal stirred beside her, his small body still groggy from the events of the night before. She gently shook him awake, her fingers brushing through his hair. "Hey, little man," she whispered. "It's a new day." Jamal blinked his eyes open, his face still full of confusion. He had no idea what had happened, but he trusted her, and that was enough. "Are we going home?" he asked, his voice soft, the innocence of childhood still lingering in his words. "Yeah," she said quietly, "we're going home." As the bikers packed up their gear, the leader gathered everyone around. "We've got to be careful," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "The people we're dealing with won't back down easily. We're not just here to stop them. We're here to shut them down for good." The girl watched as the bikers exchanged looks, their expressions focused. They weren't scared, but she could see the gravity of the situation on their faces. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was about ensuring their safety and the safety of anyone else who might be at risk. The leader turned to the girl, his eyes softening as he spoke to her. "We're going to take you and Jamal somewhere safe. The rest of us will take care of the rest." She nodded, grateful for the reassurance, but part of her still feared what might happen next. It wasn't over. Not yet. The bikers mounted their bikes and revved their engines, the sound of the powerful machines filling the air. The girl climbed onto the back of the leader's bike once more. Jamal held tightly to her, his small arms wrapped around her waist. She glanced back at the camp, the place that had offered them shelter for the night, and felt a pang of sadness. It had been a safe haven, but now it was time to move on. As they rode through the morning light, the wind against her face felt different. It wasn't the rush of fear, but the rush of something new, something hopeful. She was no longer running. She wasn't hiding. She was taking control. The leader led the way, the other bikers trailing behind in formation. The road stretched ahead, winding through the countryside, the trees and fields passing by in a blur. The girl felt the weight in her chest begin to lift as the miles rolled on. Jamal rested against her, still tired from the previous days, but safe. She could feel his heartbeat against her back, steady and calm. She couldn't protect him from everything, but she could protect him from this. And that's what mattered. As they rode, the leader glanced back at her, giving her a small nod. Almost there, he said. You're safe now. We'll make sure it stays that way. The girl didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. She had found a place where she belonged. The bikers weren't just strangers to her, they were family. They had given her and Jamal a chance to start over, and she would never forget that. The road ahead was long, and the world they were about to enter was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could breathe. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She was moving forward. And with the bikers by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The leader signaled for the group to slow down as they approached a small town in the distance. The buildings were modest, the streets quiet. This was where they would regroup. The bikers parked their bikes, and the leader turned to the girl and Jamal. Stay close, he said. We'll make sure. You're settled here, and then we'll handle things from there. The girl nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude wash over her. She had come so far, and now, for the first time in what felt like forever, she had a future ahead of her. The world may still be uncertain, but with the bikers by her side, she knew she was no longer alone. Jamal squeezed her hand, his innocent smile the first thing she had seen in days. Are we really going home? He asked again, his eyes wide with hope. The girl smiled back, her heart swelling with love for him. Yes, she said softly. We're going home. And in that moment, she knew that no matter what happened next, they would face it together. The sun had begun to set as the small group of bikers gathered near the edge of the quiet town. The streets were empty, the air filled with the distant sound of crickets chirping in the cooling evening. The leader glanced around, his eyes scanning the area to make sure no one was following them. The group had come to a stop at a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place that seemed to be safe for now. The rest of the bikers had parked their bikes in a circle, creating a protective barrier around the girl and Jamal. The girl felt a small flutter of anxiety as she watched them move into position. She had never been part of something like this before, something so organized, so deliberate. But now, with the bikers, she felt like they were all part of a team, a family. You're safe here, the leader said, turning toward her with a reassuring smile. We've got eyes on everything. No one's going to mess with you. The girl nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. They had been through so much, but she knew that the danger wasn't truly gone. They still had enemies. They still had to make sure they were free. Jamal, who had been quiet for the past few hours, tugged at her sleeve. Are we really safe now? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. The girl looked down at him, her heart aching. His innocent question brought everything into focus. She had promised him that they would be okay, but she didn't know if she could truly promise that. She didn't know if she could promise anything anymore. The leader, who had been listening, stepped forward. You're safe now, he said firmly. I won't let anyone hurt you. Not again. The girl nodded, but in her heart, she still felt the weight of the fear that had followed her for so long. She hadn't realized how much of her life had been spent in fear, always looking over her shoulder, always running. But with the bikers, with this new family she had found, she felt a sense of purpose, a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in years. We're going to make sure no one follows us, the leader continued. We've got a plan. Tonight, we move again, but this time, we'll be ready. The girl looked at him, confusion flickering across her face. Move again, she asked. Where are we going? We've got to get off the grid, he explained, his voice steady but serious. We've taken care of the immediate threats, but there's still more to be done. We're going to keep you and Jamal safe, but we've got to move fast. The longer we stay in one place, the more chance someone could find us. She felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't sure if she was ready for another move, another chance at escape. But she knew he was right. They couldn't stay here. The bikers were right. It was time to go. The leader motioned to the group, and the bikers began to pack up their things, securing their bikes, and making sure they were ready for whatever came next. The girl, still holding Jamal's hand, stood and followed him as they walked toward a small trailer at the edge of the diner parking lot. The leader led the way, his steps confident and sure. We'll be there by morning, he said. We've got a safe house on the other side of town. Once we get there, we can regroup and figure out our next move. The girl felt a flicker of hope in her chest. A A safe house. Somewhere that wasn't just a place to hide, but a place where they could finally breathe. Are you sure? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Are we really going to be okay? The leader turned and looked at her, his face softening. I'm sure. You and Jamal are going to be. Okay, we're going to make sure of it. The girl nodded, feeling a wave of emotion rise in her chest. She had been so scared for so long, but now, for the first time, she felt like she could trust someone again. The leader had promised to keep them safe, and in that moment, she believed him. As they moved toward the trailer, the rest of the bikers followed, their faces set in determination. The girl climbed into the back of the trailer with Jamal, settling him down beside her. The doors shut behind them, and the engine roared to life. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she wasn't alone. She had the bikers, her family, by her side, and together, they would face whatever came next. The night stretched on as they drove toward the unknown, the road ahead dark, but full of possibilities. The girl held Jamal close, her heart filled with a quiet hope. They were safe now. They would make it, and no one was going to take that away from them. The trailer bumped along the dirt road, the sound of the engine humming steadily as the girl sat beside Jamal, her arm wrapped protectively around him. The night had fallen completely, and though the darkness outside the trailer felt suffocating, there was a strange sense of peace in here. The road they were on was bumpy, full of twists and turns, but it didn't matter anymore. For the first time in days, the girl allowed herself to relax, just a little. She glanced over at Jamal, his head resting on her shoulder, still exhausted from the events that had unfolded. He had been through so much, just like her, but he was still here. He was still with her. That thought alone made her feel a little stronger. She wasn't alone anymore. She had her brother. She had the bikers. The leader had promised her that they would get to safety, and she was beginning to believe it. The sound of engines continued to reverberate through the trailer as the bikers moved as one, a single force heading toward an uncertain future. But there was something comforting about it. They were moving together, with purpose, without hesitation. The leader was still in charge, still guiding them through the chaos, and that steadiness made all the difference. The girl felt a pang of gratitude. She didn't know how much longer they could keep running, but as long as they had each other, as long as they had the bikers, she would keep going. She would keep fighting. The trailer slowed as it approached a small, isolated cabin nestled between tall trees. The bikers had chosen this spot carefully, remote, off the beaten path, and far enough from prying eyes. It wasn't much, but it was safe for now. The trailer came to a halt, and the girl took a deep breath as she stood up, gently waking Jamal. Hey, little man, she whispered softly. We're here. He stirred, rubbing his eyes as he sat up, still groggy but curious. Where are we? He asked, his voice still quiet from sleep. The girl smiled at him, brushing his hair out of his face. We're safe, she said, her voice steady. This is our new home for now. Jamal's eyes brightened, and she could see the hope returning in them. For the first time, he wasn't looking over his shoulder, waiting for danger. They climbed out of the trailer, and the girl took Jamal's hand as they walked toward the cabin. The bikers were already unloading their gear, setting up a perimeter around the cabin. The leader was giving quiet orders, making sure everyone knew their role. There was a sense of calm here, a quiet confidence that filled the air. The girl felt it too. She felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance at a real life now. This is it, the leader said as he approached them. We're going to lay low here for a while. This place is off the grid, but it's secure. We'll keep an eye out for anyone looking for trouble. The girl nodded, grateful for the safety they had found, but a small part of her still couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. They had made it this far, but the world outside still felt uncertain. The leader seemed to sense her unease. We've got your back, he said, his voice firm. We'll make sure nothing happens to you or Jamal. I promise. The girl looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She wasn't used to trusting people, especially not after everything that had happened, but with him and the others, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. They weren't just protecting her, they were offering her a future. She smiled at him, her voice quiet but sincere. Thank you, she said, for everything. He gave her a small nod, his eyes softening just a little. You don't have to thank me, he said. We take care of our own. You're part of this family now, and we'll fight for you every step of the way. The girl felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For so long, she had been alone, just trying to survive. But now, with the bikers, she wasn't just surviving. She was part of something bigger, something worth fighting for. As the night stretched on, the girl and Jamal settled into the cabin, the warmth of the fire flickering in the hearth. She looked at her brother, who had fallen asleep next to her, and felt a deep sense of peace. They were safe, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe they could stay safe. The bikers had given them a chance, and she wasn't about to waste it. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, but tonight, she would rest. Tonight, they had a home, and that was enough. The morning after their arrival at the cabin, the sun had barely risen when the girl woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside. She opened her eyes, her body still sore from the long days of running, but there was a new sense of calm in her heart. She glanced over at Jamal, who was still asleep beside her, his small body curled up on the makeshift bed. She felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. They were safe. For now, at least. She knew they couldn't stay here forever, but for the first time, she allowed herself to feel a little hope. The bikers had done what they promised, getting them to this secluded cabin far away from the chaos. They had given her and Jamal a chance to breathe, a chance to recover. The leader had stayed true to his word. They were safe, hidden away from the world. The girl stood up slowly, trying not to wake Jamal, and moved to the small window of the cabin. The landscape outside was serene, wide open fields, distant trees, and a clear blue sky above. It was a stark contrast to the life she had been living. It almost felt too peaceful, too quiet. She heard the low hum of the motorcycles outside, the bikers already up and moving. They were always prepared, always on guard. The girl couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. They were doing so much for her and Jamal, but she had nothing to give in return. She wasn't a fighter like them. She was just someone who had been running from her past, trying to survive. As she turned away from the window, she saw the leader standing in the doorway, watching her. He had a way of moving quietly, his presence always felt, even when he wasn't speaking. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but filled with a warmth that she had come to trust. "How did you sleep?" She nodded, giving him a small smile. "Better. Thank you." "You don't have to thank me," he said, his eyes softening for a moment. "It's what we do. We protect those who need it." She looked at him, grateful for his words, but she felt like there was something more she needed to understand. "How long do we stay here?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. He stepped into the room, his eyes flicking over to Jamal. "As long as it takes. But we'll be moving again soon." He paused, his expression serious. "You're not alone in this. We'll make sure you're safe, and once we've taken care of the threat, we'll figure out what comes next." She nodded, still trying to process everything. She had never asked for this life, never wanted to be part of something like this, but now she couldn't imagine leaving. The bikers had become her family, and she owed them more than she could ever repay. "Thank you," she said again, this time more firmly. "For everything." The leader gave her a slight smile. "You don't need to thank us. But you're welcome." He turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "We've got eyes on the situation," he said, his tone darkening. "Things are still moving, and we need to stay ahead of it." The girl swallowed hard. She had been hoping for a break, for a chance to just breathe, but she knew that wasn't realistic. The world didn't just stop for them to heal. The leader's voice softened again as he looked at her. "Stay close to us. We'll handle it." She nodded once more, trying to push down the fear that was creeping up again. They were safe here, but for how long? The leader turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the cabin. The girl took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had promised herself she wouldn't let fear control her anymore, but it was hard to shake the feeling that danger was never far behind. She moved over to where Jamal was still asleep, his small hand clutching the blanket. She knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, even though she wasn't sure if she believed it. She knew she had to protect him, keep him safe, no matter what came next. She couldn't let him go through any more fear. She wasn't sure what their future would look like, but for the first time in a long time, she was willing to face it. The leader had been right. She wasn't alone anymore. The bikers were with her, and that meant everything. As she watched Jamal stir in his sleep, she made a silent promise to herself. She would keep him safe. She would protect him with everything she had, just as the bikers had protected her. They were a family now, and nothing was going to break that bond. The future was uncertain, but for now, they had each other. And that was enough. The morning sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the cabin and the surrounding woods. The girl stood by the window, her eyes scanning the open fields beyond, where the land stretched out, peaceful and still. It was hard to believe how much had changed in just a few days. The fear, the uncertainty, the constant running. Those things felt so distant now. But she knew the danger wasn't over. They had taken a step forward, but there was still a long road ahead. She could feel it in the air. The leader walked into the room, his expression serious, but there was something in his eyes, something that told her they had come to a turning point. "We've done everything we can," he said, his voice steady. "The men we took down last night, those were the ones causing the most harm. But there's still a web of people connected to them. We need to go after them, make sure no one else gets hurt." The girl turned to face him, her heart beating faster. She had never imagined that something like this would become her reality. She was just a woman trying to protect her brother, but now she was part of something much bigger. The leader had promised to protect them, and he had kept that promise. But the world they were in wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking control, taking back their lives. "What do we do next?" she asked, her voice steady but unsure. The leader looked at her, his eyes softening. "We move. We keep going. We keep fighting for what's ours." He turned and motioned for the others to gather around. "We've been laying low long enough. It's time to finish this." The bikers nodded, their faces determined, their loyalty to each other clear in their eyes. The girl felt something stir in her, something she hadn't felt in so long. It was the feeling of strength, of power, of being part of something that mattered. Jamal, who had been quiet all morning, walked over to her, his small hand reaching up to tug at her sleeve. "Are we leaving?" he asked, his voice small but filled with curiosity. The girl bent down, placing a hand on his shoulder, feeling the warmth of his small body. "We're going to keep moving, little man. We're going to make sure no one can hurt us again." Jamal nodded, trusting her, as he always did. He didn't understand everything that had happened, but he trusted the bikers. He trusted her, and that meant everything. The girl stood up, her heart pounding as the bikers prepared to leave the cabin. They had been here for a while now, long enough to catch their breath, but it was time to move on. Time to face whatever came next. "Let's go," the leader said, his voice full of resolve. The group mounted their bikes, the engines roaring to life one by one. The girl climbed onto the back of the leader's bike again, Jamal sitting in front of her, his small hands gripping the seat. As they pulled away from the cabin, she couldn't help but look back one last time. This had been their safe haven, their moment of peace. But now they were leaving it behind. They were ready to face the world. The road stretched out before them, the wind whipping through her hair, the sound of the engines filling the air. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind calm her thoughts. She had no idea what was ahead, but she was no longer afraid. She had the bikers by her side. She had Jamal, and that was enough. The leader led them down the winding road, their destination uncertain, but their resolve unshakable. They had come this far, and they weren't turning back now. The girl could feel the sense of purpose growing stronger within her with each passing mile. This was her new life, her new family, and they would face whatever came next, together. They rode through the countryside, the sun now high in the sky, the open road stretching ahead, endless and full of possibilities. The world was still dangerous, still uncertain, but the girl no longer felt lost. She had found her place, her purpose. And as the bikers rode on, side by side, she knew that nothing would ever take that away from them. Not now, not ever.